At my niece's wedding, I was handed over the envelope with the final payment for the venue, and my brother took the mic and said, "Let's all thank the man who was never there unless a check was involved." Laughter. Applause. Not a single person defended me. So I walked out, called the bank, and froze the entire wedding fund, while they were still toasting with champagne I paid for. I, 52M, never thought I'd be writing this, but here we are. What happened at my niece's wedding 3 days ago has left me questioning everything about my family, and I need to get this off my chest. For context, I'm what you'd call successful. I built my consulting firm from nothing over the past 20 years, worked 70-hour weeks, and yes, I've missed family gatherings. Not because I don't care, but because someone has to pay for the life everyone expects. My brother has always resented this. He's a teacher, noble profession, but he's also spent the last decade making snide comments about my absence at birthdays and holidays, while simultaneously asking for loans he never pays back. 6 months ago, my niece got engaged. She's a sweet kid, just turned 23, and her fiancé seems decent enough. The problem was money. My brother and his wife had saved exactly $3,000 for what they envisioned as a $15,000 wedding. When the tears started and the family pressure mounted, guess who got the call? My sister-in-law explained through sobs how they dreamed of this perfect day, how my niece deserved something special, how they'd already put deposits down they couldn't afford to lose. My brother got on the phone and, for once, wasn't hostile. He actually sounded grateful when he asked if I could help. Not loan help, as in gift. I said yes. $12,000 to make up the difference. I had one condition. I wanted to be involved in the planning, not financially, but as an uncle who cared about his niece's big day. They agreed enthusiastically. That enthusiasm lasted about 2 weeks. Every time I called to check on venue selections or catering choices, I was brushed off. When I suggested we meet to go over the budget together, my brother told me they had it handled. When I offered to take my niece dress shopping, my sister-in-law said they'd already been. I started feeling like a bank rather than family, but I pushed those thoughts aside. This was about my niece, not my bruised ego. The wedding day arrived. I'd been looking forward to it despite everything. I wore my best suit, brought an expensive gift, and arrived early to help if needed. The venue was stunning, a lakeside pavilion with white draping and flowers everywhere. My money had bought something beautiful. The ceremony went smoothly. My niece looked radiant, and I felt genuinely happy watching her marry someone she clearly loved. During the cocktail hour, I mingled, took photos, and tried to ignore the fact that I was being introduced to relatives I'd helped support financially over the years as the successful one, with air quotes and knowing looks. Then came the reception. The meal was excellent, the band was lively, and the champagne flowed freely. I was actually enjoying myself until my brother stood up to give his speech. He started well enough, talking about his daughter and how proud he was. Then his tone shifted. He began talking about sacrifice, about what really mattered in life, about showing up for family. I felt a knot forming in my stomach as his eyes found mine across the room. That's when he said it. He grabbed the microphone, gestured toward me, and announced to the 150 guests that they should all thank the man who was never there unless a check was involved. The laughter started immediately. Not polite chuckles, but genuine laughter, as if this was the punchline everyone had been waiting for. But it was the applause that broke something inside me. Real applause, led by my own sister-in-law. My niece was laughing too, covering her mouth with her hand, but laughing nonetheless. I looked around that room full of people. People I'd helped financially over the years, people whose kids' college funds I'd contributed to, people whose medical bills I'd quietly paid, and not one person looked uncomfortable. Not one person defended me. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, watching their faces, waiting for someone to realize how cruel this was. When it became clear that wasn't happening, I stood up. I didn't storm out dramatically or make a scene. I simply walked to the bar where the final venue payment envelope was sitting, the one I'd brought containing $3,000 in cash for the balance. Picked it up and headed for the exit. My brother was still talking, milking his moment, when I stepped outside and called my bank. The wedding fund account was in my name, set up specifically for this event. The account that still held $8,000 earmarked for the band's final payment, the photographer's balance, and the catering gratuities. I froze the entire account. Then I got in my car and drove home, while my family toasted with champagne I'd paid for, ate food I'd funded, and danced to music that would soon stop playing when the checks started bouncing. The call started 2 hours later. My brother first, screaming about how I'd ruined everything. Then my sister-in-law, crying about how embarrassed they were when the band packed up mid-song. Then extended family members calling me selfish, petty, cruel. But here's what nobody seems to understand. I didn't do this to hurt my niece. I did it because after 20 years of being the family ATM while being treated like an obligation, I finally reached my breaking point. That speech wasn't a joke. It was a public humiliation designed to put me in my place while taking my money. My niece called yesterday. She was surprisingly calm. She told me she understood why I was hurt, but asked if I could reconsider for her sake. I asked her why she laughed during her father's speech. She was quiet for a long time before admitting she felt pressured by the crowd's reaction and didn't want to cause drama on her wedding day. I told her I'd think about releasing the funds, but I needed time. Update 1. It's been a week since I wrote the original post, and the situation has evolved in ways I didn't expect. The response here gave me a lot to think about, and I want to thank everyone who took the time to share their perspectives, both supportive and critical. First, the immediate aftermath. The wedding venue was understanding when my brother explained the situation. They allowed the reception to continue, but made it clear the remaining balance was due within 48 hours. The band, less accommodating, packed up immediately when their check was declined. The photographer, thankfully, had been paid in advance, so at least my niece has her photos. My brother spent the first few days alternating between rage and desperate pleas. He even showed up at my office, which crossed a line. I had security escort him out, and I think that's when it hit him that this wasn't a tantrum he could wait out. But the real turning point came when my niece visited me alone. She sat in my living room, still pale from the stress of the past week, and apologized. Not the surface-level apology I'd expected, but something deeper. She told me she'd been thinking about our family dynamics for years and realized how unfairly I'd been treated. She said watching her father's speech again on someone's phone recording made her sick to her stomach. Then she said something that surprised me. She thanked me for freezing the account. She explained that the wedding had become something she didn't recognize. The pressure to have the perfect day, the constant discussions about money, the way her parents spoke about me when they thought she wasn't listening, it had all been eating at her. My dramatic exit, as she called it, had forced her to confront how toxic things had become. She asked if I'd be willing to meet with her parents, not to reconcile necessarily, but to have an honest conversation about our relationship. I agreed, but only if it happened at a neutral location with her present. That meeting happened yesterday. My brother looked like he'd aged years in a week. My sister-in-law could barely make eye contact. We sat in a coffee shop, and for the first time in decades, we talked honestly about our family. My brother started with defensiveness, trying to justify his speech as a joke that went too far. But when I asked him to explain exactly what was funny about publicly humiliating someone who'd just given $12,000 to make his daughter's wedding possible, he broke down. He admitted he'd been jealous of my success for years. While I was building my career, he was struggling to pay bills on a teacher's salary. He resented that I could solve family problems with money while he felt powerless to help his own daughter. The speech wasn't really about my absence from family events. It was about his own feelings of inadequacy as a provider. My sister-in-law opened up too. She talked about how difficult it had been to ask for help, how grateful they truly were, and how that gratitude had somehow twisted into resentment over time. She said they'd convinced themselves that I gave money easily because it didn't mean anything to me, when the truth was they needed it to mean less because accepting it hurt their pride. I listened to all of this, and I'll be honest, part of me felt vindicated. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired of being the villain in their story about financial struggle when I'd been trying to help. I told them I'd release the funds on 3 conditions. First, my brother would make a public apology, not to me, but to the wedding guests who witnessed his speech, acknowledging that what he said was wrong. Second, we'd establish clear boundaries about financial help going forward. No more open-ended loans, no more emergency bailouts without structured repayment plans. Third, if they wanted me in their lives, they needed to include me in their lives, not just their financial crises. They agreed to all 3 conditions. I released the funds that afternoon. The vendors were paid, and my niece could finally enjoy being a newlywed without the stress of financial fallout. Update 2. It's been 3 weeks since my last update, and I'm writing this from what feels like a completely different family dynamic. The changes have been surprising, both positive and challenging in ways I didn't anticipate. My brother followed through on his public apology. He posted on Facebook, explaining that his wedding speech had been inappropriate and hurtful, and that he'd let his own insecurities damage an important relationship. It wasn't perfect, it felt a bit stiff, but it was public, and it named his behavior as wrong. Several family members reached out to me afterward, some apologizing for their own silence that night. The more significant change has been in our day-to-day relationship. True to our agreement, my brother and his wife have made an effort to include me in family activities beyond financial emergencies. I was invited to a barbecue 2 weeks ago, not asked to fund it, just invited to attend. It felt strange at first, almost artificial, but by the end of the evening, we were having conversations about things other than money for the first time in years. My niece has been the bridge through all of this. She's made it clear that she wants me involved in her new married life, and her husband, who I'm getting to know better, seems genuinely interested in having a relationship with me. They invited me to dinner last week, and we talked about everything from their honeymoon plans to my work to his job in graphic design. Normal family conversations that I'd forgotten were possible, but not everything has been smooth sailing. The financial boundaries I insisted on have created some tension with other family members who'd grown accustomed to my open wallet policy. My cousin called last month asking for help with his son's tuition, the same request he'd made for the past 3 years running, never once paying back the previous year's loan. When I explained that I was no longer offering open-ended financial assistance without clear repayment terms, he accused me of being vindictive and letting my fight with my brother affect my relationship with the whole family. That conversation made me realize how deep this pattern had become. I wasn't just my brother's bank. I'd become the family's unofficial financial safety net, and my sudden withdrawal from that role was causing ripple effects I hadn't considered. I've had to have similar conversations with 3 other relatives in the past 2 weeks. Each time, I've explained that I'm not cutting anyone off out of spite, but that I need relationships with my family that aren't primarily transactional. Some have understood, others haven't. The hardest conversation was with my elderly aunt, who'd been counting on my help with her roof repairs. She's on a fixed income, and the repairs are necessary, not optional. I ended up agreeing to help her, but with a structured plan that included her grandson contributing labor and her paying what she could afford monthly, even if it was just $50. It wasn't about the money. It was about maintaining dignity for both of us. My relationship with my brother continues to evolve. We're not best friends, and I don't expect we ever will be, but there's an honesty between us now that didn't exist before. He started sharing details about his struggles as a teacher that go beyond just the financial aspects, the stress, the long hours, the way he worries about his students. I've shared some of my own professional pressures, the isolation that comes with being seen as successful, the weight of being the person everyone turns to in a crisis. Last week, he asked me for advice about a career decision, whether he should pursue administration or stay in the classroom. It was the first time he'd asked for something from me that wasn't money, and it felt like a breakthrough. My sister-in-law has been the most transformed by this whole experience. She's gone out of her way to include me in family planning, sending me updates about my niece's marriage, inviting me to casual family dinners, even asking my opinion on things that have nothing to do with finances. It feels like she's trying to rebuild a relationship she realizes was broken. But I'll be honest, there are moments when I wonder if this is sustainable. When you've been the family bank for so long, transitioning to being just a family member is complicated for everyone involved. There's still an awkwardness sometimes, like everyone's trying too hard to prove that our relationships aren't about money. The wedding itself feels like a distant memory now, but its impact continues to ripple through our family in unexpected ways. My niece told me last week that the whole experience taught her important lessons about pride, gratitude, and the complexity of family relationships that she thinks will make her marriage stronger. She said watching her parents and me work through our issues showed her that even deeply damaged relationships can be repaired if everyone is willing to be honest about their part in the damage. I've learned things too. I realized that my pattern of solving family problems with money was partly my own choice. It was easier than dealing with the messy emotional work of actual relationships. Writing checks kept people grateful to me without requiring me to be vulnerable with them. The wedding disaster forced me to confront whether I wanted to be a family member or a family service provider. I'm still figuring out what the new normal looks like, But for the first time in years, I'm optimistic about my place in this family. Not as the successful one who pays for everything, not as the absent uncle who only appears during crises, but as someone who belongs here regardless of his bank account balance. The wedding fund account has been closed. The vendors were paid. The relationships were examined. And something resembling a functional family emerged from the wreckage of that humiliating night. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones worth learning.